What's going on, gang? Red Channels here. So unless you've been living under a rock for the past couple of days, you will have seen that an unstoppable force met an immovable object. There was an interview between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes. This is very big. This is very significant. Tons of people watched it. And I think it is very interesting. You have Nick shedding his political infamy, coming back into the mainstream, and being interviewed by someone who is also the most extreme in the mainstream, who is considered fringe, the one leading paleoconservative voice that this country has at the moment, in the form of Tucker Carlson. And Tucker is really crossing a Rubicon here because, again, the vibe shift after Elon bought Twitter and Trump won again has been immense. But this is something that previously seemed impossible. It previously seemed like Nick would be relegated to the fever swamps of the internet, banned off of everything, hated by everyone, totally unacceptable. And now here he is appearing as a moderate voice to many people. I can't say that this is particularly surprising because it makes sense as a career move for Fuentes. He obviously wants to grow his platform. He wants to reintegrate himself into MAGA. But it also makes sense given the fact that Kamala lost. And for those of you who remember, and few of you will at this point, he was pretty much 2 steps off being a Democrat up until the election. He had a very different tune. He had a very different tune up until quite recently, too. It was only like 4 months ago that him and his followers were handing out the Nick Fuentes was right and fell for it again awards to all the Trump voters, to everyone in MAGA, doing victory laps, saying it was so obvious that Trump was actually the pro-war candidate and we were going to go to war with Iran. And that because Elon Musk was in the administration, this country was going to be flooded with millions more Indian immigrants, and that we'd all been fooled, and Trump had pulled the wool over our eyes, and he was just another neocon. Nick is still a chameleon who has tried to get people to turn on Trump for very ridiculous reasons in a way that is very sketchy. But anyway, the interview was 2 hours long, so I figured it would be nice to go through some highlights. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
Andrew Tate's a Muslim polygamist who is very chauvinistic, and you could even argue it as someone who has ran an OnlyFans site himself, like is not an observer, let's say, of Christian sexual morality.
No.
But men are going with him because he's putting women in their place. He's talking about patriarchy and women's place in a society like that. Whereas Christian men, Catholics, Protestants alike, are both kind of tone policing the men. And they worship their wives. They worship the women, put them on a pedestal. And they kind of get bossed around. They get henpecked by the women.
I think we're required to love our wives. Like that's, all over the New Testament. Husbands, love your wives. Wives, respect your husbands. That seems like a very natural balance to me.
Yeah, and I think that you have to love your wife as your wife.
Yeah.
A lot of men...
As opposed to what? Your mom?
Well, no, like your buddy.
No. Because
I hear this all the time, and I hate this. Guys will say, I married my best friend. And I think, she's your wife. She's not your best friend. Because there's a difference.
What is the difference?
I think that when you talk about your best friend, you're a peer. You're an equal. And I think your best friendships are with other men. And I think that your wife ultimately is subordinate to you. She's your helpmate. Yeah. And ultimately, as the man in the marriage and as the father, you have authority, the final say over the household.
Well,
and
course.
She can give advice. It's not to say I'm not a freak where you say, shut up, woman. Of course, you discuss things with your wife and your wife gives input, but the authority rests with the man.
Of course. But God set up this kind of amazing system where men are physically stronger.
Mm-hmm.
So of course you could make your wife do whatever you wanted. You're bigger than she is.
Right.
But he also instilled in men this desire to please your wife. That's a very natural thing. You want your wife to be happy.
Absolutely.
And the whole happy wife, happy life thing is completely real. It's like you can't get away from it. It's not like all of these things, it's not a choice. It's the biological reality that you live with, that you were born with. Like you want your wife to be happy. And if she's unhappy, you're unhappy to a much greater extent than vice versa, right?
Yeah.
I think men care about their wives being happy much more than wives care about their husbands being happy.
Yes.
I have noticed. And that's compensation for their lack of physical power. That's my view of it. And that's why it is this kind of perfect balance.
This was something I found myself strongly agreeing with Nick on against Tucker. And I think it's partly that Tucker is stuck in that sort of old tradcon mindset where he buys into a lot of this romanticism that people have around relationships. Now, whether or not he lives that out in his personal life is another thing, but he at least pays lip service to these ideas. And it's ironic. I don't even think Nick Fuentes is straight, but I think he's clearly giving better advice on women than Tucker is. The issue is that boundaries and expectations regarding relationships have changed. A random girl on a college campus may have an OnlyFans, may have an OF. At the college I was at, girls were writing it on little whiteboards on their dorm doors. And in a cultural milieu where this sort of behavior is tolerated, if not widespread, then there are obviously going to be problems with women accepting male authority. This is just the consequence of feminism. Because the actual moral quality of your average young woman, by TradCon's own standards, is fairly low. But then suddenly when it comes to dating and relationships, these mainstream TradCon voices like Tucker Carlson say these things, like make these excuses and have this very romantic view when it comes to women, men, leadership in the context of relationships. And there is someone made a response to this on Twitter. It was a right-wing e-girl made a response, Morgan Ariel. And she said, "As much as I dislike Nick, I truly pity him after watching this and realize that he is just a lost and loveless soul who will never comprehend the true love of a woman and the driving force of that love that creates a desire to move mountains and conquer the world for her for reasons I don't need to state, because he's gay." Tucker exhibited true biblical masculinity throughout this discussion, which is something the younger generation needs to hear. Biblical marriage is not about power or control. It's not about how somebody can serve you, but how you can serve somebody else. The ultimate sacrifice and a death to one's ego. Don't enter into such a union if you're not ready to live for somebody else. And yeah, I think Tucker knows. Saying that biblical marriage is not about power or control is completely insane and totally unbiblical. Biblical marriage is all about power and control, like all of the institutions that God has ordained for mankind ever. Parents over children, elders over flock, citizens under rulers, wives under husbands. Mutual submission, this mutual submission people often reference, tradcons often reference, is mutual submission to one another, as in submission being faithfulness to one's divinely ordained role. And the two roles for men and women are different. This isn't about some sort of social equality. This is about, if you are a man, submission to her would not be leaving to go get cigarettes and milk from the store and never coming back. As a man, you have to be a provider, and in turn, the woman gives the man her cooperation and deference. And this platitude that Tucker expressed, happy wife, happy life, is this sentiment of this go along, get along attitude that is, well, maybe just compromise. And even if she seems upset, like, you don't actually, you go from having final say to then negotiating, to getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and she's just chipping away at your authority. And this is a big part of why, even in Christian communities, there are abysmally high divorce rates still.
How do you explain Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, and there are a lot like that, John Bolton? I mean, I've known them all, George W. Bush, like Karl Rove. I mean, all people I know personally who I've seen like be seized by this brain virus, and they're not Jewish. Most of them are self-described Christians, and then the Christian Zionists who are, well, Christian Zionists. Like, what is that?
Right.
And I can just say for myself, I dislike them more than anybody. Because like what? Because it's Christian heresy, and I'm offended by that as a Christian. That's why. So I don't like. Why not? Like, I'm pissed at the neocons. Very pissed. I've said that a million times. I've been mad since December of 2003 when I went to Iraq. And so like I went and asked straightforward questions to Ted Cruz, because that seemed like there's a sitting senator who's like serving for Israel by his own description. He seemed like a worthy target. I'm not going after MTG, who's like the most sincere like, why not go after Ted Cruz? I don't understand.
This was one of those moments where I was like, I'm not surprised Tucker feels this way, but then I can't believe he actually went there and said it. Criticizing Christian Zionism, specifically that sort of evangelical dispensationalism, is usually a huge no-no. And Tucker's really just going all in here. I've heard that Mark Levin was pissed about this interview, but Tucker went and did it anyways. So I'm really curious to see where the boundaries are, what this is going to evolve into. Nick Fuentes is obviously taking a much more moderate position. He's really accommodating many of the things he said. But before, Tucker saying something like this to someone like Nick would have probably been career-ending, or at least licensed to get him deplatformed. So this really feels, to me, I just feel over and over again like this is like the Twitterization of regular politics. Not that anyone could really ever end Tucker's career because he is independently wealthy, but I mean like a complete, he's banned off of all other platforms and then becomes even more of a black sheep in the conservative movement. Tons of people coming out and criticizing him. Like, that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. The people who are angry about it don't have the power to cancel Nick or Tucker at the moment. Nick is like post-canceled. Tucker hasn't been canceled because he's always kind of, been that paleocon. But now they just don't have the means to clap down on him. Like, the genie's out of the bottle. And I am very curious to see where this goes. To me, this definitely seems like a step forward toward a transformation in the collective consciousness of, shall we say, rural populists, evangelicals, and generally GOP voters, if you know what I mean.
The other thing I'm really worried about is what's happening at these ICE detention centers, where it's happening not far from where I live in Broadview, Illinois, where they set up an ICE detention facility, and the administration is rounding these people up, which I support, but they're doing it in a very provocative way. They're broadcasting it. They're making hype edits on Twitter of like these raids on apartment complexes, which I think are very cool, but it's somewhat provocative. And Antifa showing up. In order to protect ICE, the administration's putting DHS. Well, now they're protesting the DHS presence, and the administration of the governor of Illinois and the mayor of Chicago are telling Chicago police, don't help ICE. And they're encouraging the protesters. And what I see there is like a level of tension that just keeps increasing.
Yes.
And there's leadership. There's civilian leadership on both sides. Like the governor and mayor, who are Democrats, won't back down versus a Republican president. There's a security division too, the police versus ICE, the police versus DHS. There's a constitutional question about the federal supremacy, you know, and I see all the ingredients of like a low boil civil conflict, full blown civil war. And I'm not that guy, but I see all the ingredients there for that to happen. So I'm deeply concerned about where that will go.
How would you handle it if you were in charge? If you're the president, what do you do about that?
I think maybe this is controversial, but they have to crush the other side. They have to, because you can do one of two things. You cannot challenge the left and let them do their thing, or you can utterly confront them and defeat them and remove hope from the equation. If you resist, you will be arrested. Like, this is an insurrection. There's 10 million people here illegally. We're getting them out. You're rioting. You're going to jail too. Like, it has to be crushed. But if you do anything less than that, if you do in the middle, all you're doing is antagonizing and feeding the other side. And if they think there's a chance they can win, they will get bolder and stronger and they'll start to rally. And that's when it's sort of like people think it's close or like it's contentious. That's when it breathes. That's when oxygen is fed to this kind of fire. So if I were Trump, I would say screw 200 National Guard, like arrest the mayor of Chicago, like arrest the governor, shut it down, like make it clear, like Washington, bring in the troops and say the federal government is supreme. The immigration law is the law of the land. If you're not on board with that, you're going to jail. If you attack ICE or box them in with your car, you're going to jail for a long time. Anything less than that, you might as well just not even bark up that tree at all.
I completely agree with Nick's sentiment here. This is defiance. What the left is doing is open defiance. They are subverting they're attempting to resist the will of most of this country in solving the immigration crisis, in doing all these things. So the gloves really need to come off here. And I think in the coming months, I think we're still going to see sporadic, stochastic left-wing terror, incidences of left-wing violence for the foreseeable future. I think this is going to continue until 2028, when things are going to heat up again. And assuming Vance wins, only maybe if he has 2 terms in a row of winning, will the left finally realize that they actually need to come to the table and talk to the right.
I thought you were a Fed. I
thought you were a Fed.
I was a Fed.
Yeah.
I'm not a Fed. But whatever, I don't care what people think.
We showed each other a badge as we know well.
No, but I thought you were a Fed because I was like, why not? It's not cucking to say you're not talking about all Jews when you oppose a foreign policy position. It's not. There's nothing liberal about that. It's just true. That's the Christian position, okay? And 2, why are you attacking like the best people and not the worst people?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, he disavowed me for my views on Israel and said I talk too much about white people and Christianity. And to me, that's like a sincere ideological disagreement.
I get it.
And, same thing with Marjorie. Marjorie fired my guy. She disavowed me. And, and you worked with Blumenthal on that article, but you called me on the phone and we talked.
Yeah. I mean,
I was
like, what? From my perspective, this is all so stupid and inside baseball and whatever, but for the record, I was like, first of all, who is this kid? I'm working at Fox News. I'm aware there's an internet, but I'm more out of it than you may appreciate. And I'm like, out of nowhere, attacking this one. I had Joe Kent here to my house and did this interview with him. And I'm always in search of a sincere politician. Don't have to agree on everything, but I really believe sincerity is the whole game. If someone's heart is pure, he will be brave. I always have thought that, and it's turned out to be true. Marjorie's a perfect example. And that's all that matters. If you're afraid inside, if you're weak inside, you will crumble when it matters. So I really felt like, wow, Joe, don't agree with him on everything, of course, but I was like, this guy is really sincere. He's like a good person. And then you show up and you're like, he's a CIA officer and he was a CIA contractor, but like really like crush the guy. And it's like, why of all people, you agree on 90% of stuff, that was my view. And I was like, well, clearly this kid's a Fed.
Right. But you didn't know the whole story.
I didn't. You're absolutely right.
And look, and now that, and I'm not trying to be combative. I think that.
Go ahead. You're hurting my feelings.
Here's what I'm trying to say is now that Marjorie is pushing in the right direction, I absolutely support everything she's saying. And I've not been critical of her at all this year.
Yeah.
Because I think that what she's doing is extremely courageous. And I think you're right. She is sincere.
So it sounds like you're, not to put words in your mouth, but your life experience has left you so stung by the Republican establishment. You don't trust anybody, it sounds like.
Well, no, I mean, these people attacked me when the rules were different, and now they got better, and now I'm good with them. I mean, I'm willing to be good with them, but I think that I don't know if Marjorie still has a problem with me or not.
It's not just that. Nick has said and done tons of other things that would hint at him being a Fed. He's had his assets frozen, which is a massive red flag. Once a person's had their assets frozen, because this was over January 6th, I think. Once a person's had their assets frozen like that, once they get them unfrozen, it's usually because they are on a leash, and the entity holding that leash is the state. It was also really absurd that other people were saying, especially in Nick's camp when Nick and Tucker were feuding online, it was absurd that people in Nick's camp were accusing Tucker of being a Fed because Tucker is, I think he's an heir to, what is it, some sort of meat packing plant fortune. I forget what specifically. Tyson chicken nuggets, maybe that was it. He's independently wealthy like several times over. So he's not a person who would be a Fed. He's a person who would influence the Feds, and very may well have. It's, his dad being CIA isn't some sort of gotcha. Like he's another social class unto himself. But anyway, I think Nick will have a prominent future in the conservative movement, just based off of a lot of the sort of comparisons that people were making of him to Charlie Kirk. A lot of mainstream figures were unprompted asking, saying, is he going to pick up the torch? Like now he is. There wasn't actually really anyone under Charlie who had bigger shoes than Nick. He is now the new premier right-wing youth activist throughout the entire country, for better or for worse. Because at least for the time being, the door feels very wide open for Nick to perhaps begin rebuilding some bridges. We will have to see where it goes. Anyways, what are your thoughts on this situation? I would love to read your comments, see what you have to say down in the comment section below. Agree, disagree, think my analysis is accurate, think this is headed somewhere, or will it fizzle out? Let me know. And Red Channels will catch you in the next one. A person like me, smoke moonshine, this thing, I don't know